hear our praises roar.
Blinded by the light, that's where you want to be. In fact, I'm going to do this a little bit.
Okay.
So we can put that kind of there.
Oh,
So
okay.
if you're in the dark here,
Right, okay.
that's going to be bad for the camera.
Okay.
Move this here so that way, whatever you do, you're in the light.
Okay.
That'd be
Great.
great. It's a really good picture.
Okay. And when I go to advance the slide, am I blocking anything? Like if I stand here, am I blocking anything?
I don't think so.
Okay.
This is the thing here, so and you just hit the space bar.
Oh, the space bar. Ah. That's only if I have to go back.
Back can be left arrow.
Ah, great. That's awesome. Okay. And are you going to introduce me or? Yeah. So one of the things you might want to say, since this is related to grains, is two main points. Mention the gut health stuff. You know, I used to have Perfect Pickler. I just sold it this week to Zach Bauer.
The whole thing?
Yeah, I
The
saw.
whole company?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. I needed to get it off my plate because I couldn't get all my ministry stuff done. Yeah. Yeah. It was a Jubilee week for me, for sure. But so that's been like, my whole life has been studied around gut health because of that. But the other thing, I used to own 3 restaurants, and they were like a Panera Bread. We sold 350 loaves of bread a day.
I'm just gonna introduce
So,
you. You say all the cool
you
stuff.
think so? I don't know. I hate talking about myself. Too much. 2 things. Too many. And then I guess you get to say what you want to say. Oh, but we don't have an extension cord for this. Oh.
So he said he's in a right turn lane, but he said it's not really bad. And then he said he had someone try to help him jump it. It didn't work. So some guy came up to him and says, "Well, I can run you up to AutoZone." So he's got.
Check 1 2 1 2. Check 1 2. Can everybody hear this? Okay. It's pretty loud. Pretty loud. Check 1 2 1 2. Check 1 2. Check 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 1 2. Check 1 2 1 2 1 2. Check 1 2. Check 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 check. Check 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 1 2 1 2. 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8.
Keep talking? You want me to keep talking? All right, so it's so hard to find something to talk about. Hey, how are you doing? Good to see you again. Yeah, I'm excited to be back with you guys. I'll be back again in September. I'm here for the week, but I won't be here for Shabbat because I'll be leaving before then next week. So this is my only time with you guys this particular trip. And you're here tomorrow. So, and I'm here tomorrow, yes. I'll be here tomorrow and then back again in September. I haven't checked the dates yet, but I'm sure there's a Shabbat that falls in line in September. So maybe we can plan something fun then. I also I've been really wanting to join one of the worship jams over at their house. I'd like to bring my son who's a drummer and come over there and just hang out and do some worship music would be great. So do you still need me to keep talking?
Yeah.
Yes? It doesn't sound good yet? All right, so what else can I talk about? I got back from Kenya today. I'm going to give you an update on that because I was just there. I'm excited to hear your update on your girls that you're rescuing from trafficking. Has anybody seen that movie that's out right now about, yeah, is it good? I haven't seen it yet. It's something everyone should see. What's the name of it again? Sound of Freedom. Okay, so yeah, hoping to see that this week. Is it in theaters locally? Yes, it is? Okay, good. I'm going to try to see that then this week for sure. Hello, good to see you again. Welcome. This is so fun now. I've been here enough times that I'm starting to recognize people's faces. I have some of the names learned. That's awesome. So I just need to come a few more times till I can get the names really learned, and that would be great.
Check.
So do you still need me to keep talking?
I think we're good.
Okay, good.
I think we're good.
Good, awesome.
Okay.
I'm ready. Yeah, I'm ready.
All right. Shabbat Shalom, everyone who's here. That
Shabbat
was
shalom.
horrible. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
All right. That's pretty awesome. Okay. That was much better, David. Good job. Okay. I'm super excited because we named the church and the community Freedom Hill because we believe in freedom. We believe in freedom in every aspect, every area of life. Amen, Laura?
Amen.
And when Wendy comes, she's always talking about all these classes that she does and all these courses that she does overseas and all across the nation. And so, especially in Florida, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, we were talking, we were like, why don't we do some of that here? You're coming into town. So we decided, yes, let's do it. So today we're going to be talking about correct grains consumption. Mm-hmm. This is a big deal all over the planet. Mm-hmm. This is a major deal. And then this plays into gut health and different things that we're going to talk about tomorrow. So this is about freedom in your health, freedom in your body. Can I get an amen?
Amen.
All right. So, well, let's welcome Wendy. Give her a big round of applause. She's put a lot of effort and time. Come on up.
Oh, thank you.
And enjoy. All right.
All right. Awesome. It's a pleasure to be with you guys again today, especially with this topic. This is probably one of the topics I'm most passionate about. My life career has been primarily centered around gut health. So I spent over 20 years studying gut health because of the business that I had, which is Perfect Pickler, where we created the first ever jar top fermentation system. So when you come out tomorrow, I'm going to boil down my 20 years of study and really give you what you need to know about maintaining good gut health, which is very important. There should be 36,000 different strains of beneficial bacteria in our gut, and the average American has 300 to 1,000. Yeah, but there's a way to rebuild it. So I encourage you to come out tomorrow if you can and tell those that are able to come to also attend as well. So grains, I've been passionate about grains probably my whole life. In my early 20s, I opened 3 restaurants. They were kind of like a Panera Bread. We sold 350 loaves of bread a day. And even when I first got married, I was only 18, I remember the first thing I did was get a big book on bread. And I thought, how do they do that? How do you make a loaf of bread? And I was so excited in my early years to learn how to do that. And I'm still carrying forth my love for that as today I'm building a mud pizza oven to actually make artisan bread outside. And so that's even another layer deeper I'm taking it. But I just love this topic, so I'm looking forward to it, and we're going to just get started on it. We want to talk about the correct way to consume grains. So what really are grains? They are cereal grasses that produce a seed-bearing fruit. So that seed-bearing fruit of the grass family is what is considered grains. Some are gluten, some are not. It's all in the grass family. So let's talk first about wheat. Is wheat the staff of life? What does that mean to be the staff of life? You know, what do you think of when you think of a staff? Consistent? You said? What would other people think of? Moses with the staff? Yeah. Well, if you look up the definition of it, it's actually something by which your life can safely depend upon. And so if you're using that staff to walk, you're actually using it to prevent, to actually your life can sustain, right? It can depend upon it. So that means it's supposed to be something that we could sustain ourselves with, should be what that means. So, and here's the word we have, sustenance, the same kind of thing. Wheat should be subsistence for us. It should produce life. So why would money be called dough? It's the same kind of thing, right? So money is sustenance. We have to have money, right? And money and dough were actually considered interchangeable terms. Even if we look at the Lord's Prayer, what does it say? Give us this day our daily bread. Yeah, our daily bread. If we look at our nation, the national anthem talked about the amber waves of grain. And these actually were up to people's shoulders, this type of wheat that they had traditionally. If it's as tall as your shoulders are, that's swaying in the wind and really looking beautiful across the prairie, but it was sustenance. We had a rise in bread cross that was one of the things that actually sparked and started the French Revolution. So it was a major crop. And wheat is something that is not fed to animals except for one situation, and I'm going to tell you what that is later on. But in Berlin, around the 1800s, a mason with a family of 5, they would have spent 44% of their income on bread. So what percentage do you think you're spending on bread? And how much do you value it? They clearly valued it if 44% of their income was going on for bread, right? That was like a major thing that their life was dependent upon. So let's take just a quick trip, a journey through history. We'll edit that out. So let's just take a quick journey through history. Here's a couple quotes I want to read real quick because I want you to think about how did people envision wheat and grains historically, because our modern mindset does not view it the same way, do we? At all. So let's take a look at what did they think throughout history. So here's one quote. It says, the ancient Spartans, whose powers of endurance are proverbial, were fed on a grain diet, and the Roman soldiers who under Caesar conquered the world carried each a bag of parched grain in his pocket for his daily ration. Have you ever parched grain? Do you know how to do that? I've done it, and it's quite interesting. And I've got the little bag I can put on my belt when I'm walking from place to place. It's a very interesting, fun trick to do. If you want to know how to do that, get with me later, and I'll tell you how to do it. One great reason why I never had a really sick day in my life was that as a boy, I lived on oatmeal, and I'm sure it was raw milk, and brown bread, potatoes, and a bit of meat when I could get it, and then oatmeal again. And this guy lived in the 1800s. But that was basically, it gives you a peek of what people were eating. Here's the rations of the typical enlisted soldiers. So per man, per day, they would get 1 pound of either beef, salted fish, or pork. They'd get 1 pound of bread. Sometimes it was just in the form of flour or cornmeal. They'd get 1 pint of milk and a quart of beer. And then per week, per man, they would get some peas, beans, rice, and vinegar. So that was what they considered as their essentials for living. Here's another quote, and this is from Mrs. Kellogg. Her and her husband invented Kellogg cornflakes, and she would roll over in her grave if she knew what cornflakes were like today. Not at all the same. Some years since, a great railroad corporation in the West, having occasion to change the gauge of its road throughout a distance of some 500 miles, employed a force of 3,000 workmen upon the job, who worked from very early in the morning until late at night. Alcoholic drinks were strictly prohibited, but a thin gruel, talk about it in a minute, made of oatmeal and water was kept on hand and freely partaken of the men to quench their thirst. The results were admirable. Not a single workman gave out under the severe strain, and not one lost a day from sickness. Thus, this large body of men were kept well and in perfect strength and spirits, and the work was done in considerably less time than counted on for its completion. So gruel is actually a drink made of blended grain. So when it's really hot out in summer, like this time of the year, you take the cooked oatmeal and put it in a blender, and you can add any kind of milk, even almond milk, whatever thing you want to put in there, cinnamon, vanilla, and you blend it up into a drink, and they keep it chilled. And then it's great to send, like my husband works out on the solar field, and he's outside all day long, and it's so hot. And taking along a hot bowl of oatmeal in the morning does not sound as good as having this nice thermos of this chilled, kind of cinnamony, vanilla, creamy kind of drink. And it's refreshing, and he just sips on it all throughout the morning, and it sustains him. Just like these people built the entire railroad system, which was amazing. If you would like that recipe, get with me after the service. Here's another Spanish proverb. It says, with bread and wine, you can walk your road. Just bread and wine. And what do we have at the Feast of the Lord? 2 grain harvests and 1 wine harvest. We'll get into that a little bit further as we go. So medieval Europeans ate about 2 pounds of bread each day. Can you imagine if you ate 2 pounds a day? They must have worked a lot harder than we do. Be it the dark bread of the peasants or the finely sifted white bread of the fat kings. And this is a quote from Ellie Rogosa. She's actually Jewish, and she is the one responsible for introducing einkorn back into our society. Yes, she actually went over to Israel. She went to the Jericho dig. She went to the seed banks of Bethlehem, and she found the original grain from the fertile, it's called from the Fertile Crescent region of the world. Well, where is that? That's where Noah descended and where our original population grew from. And so that's our Father's grain, and we'll get into that a little more, but I love it. It's so exciting that it's the restoration of all things. It's coming. So here's another quote from Mrs. Kellogg. The candidates for ancient games were dieted on boiled grain with warm water, cheese, dried figs, and no meat. Here's another one, a loaf of bread, a jug of wine, and thou. Everything's great. Very few nations in the world, say a Sagitt's historian, produced better soldiers than the Russians. They will endure the greatest fatigues and sufferings with patience and calmness. And it is well known that the Russian soldiers are from childhood nourished by simple and coarse vegetable food. The Russian grenadiers are the finest body of men I ever saw, not a men under 6 feet tall. Their allowance consisted of 8 pounds of black bread and 4 pounds of oil per man for 8 days. And then here's one from 1797. Most everyday laborer in the 18th century survived on nothing but beer and bread. And beer and bread is quite interesting because it's the same organism, so you can actually take beer to start bread, and you can take bread to start beer. It's kind of cool. Yeah. All right, here's another one from Mrs. Kellogg. The following truthful but Scandinavian history well illustrates the influence of habits of frugality upon national character. The Danes were approaching, and one of the Swedish bishops asked how many men the province of Dalarna could furnish. At least 20,000 was the reply, for the old men are just as strong and brave as the young ones. But what do they live upon? Upon bread and water. They take little account of hunger and thirst, and when corn is lacking, they make their bread out of tree bark. Nay, said the bishop, a people who eat tree bark and drink water the devil himself could not vanquish, and neither were they vanquished. Their progress was one series of triumphs till they paced Gustavus Vasa on the throne of Sweden. And this is amazing. Now, the word corn there, up until the 1900s, corn and grain were interchangeable. So have you ever wondered, what did Joseph store? What did he store up? And you look in one translation, it says he stored grain. And you look at another translation, it says he stored corn. That's because they were interchangeable up until around the 1900s, okay, between the two. So when this one says corn, it could be grain, not necessarily corn. And then as far as tree bark is concerned, yes, their carbohydrate is edible in tree bark, especially pine trees. You can take the outer bark off, and you can capture the inner bark, and you can dry it out and grind it into powder. There's lots of tribes historically that actually used tree bark to stretch their wheat. So every time a tree comes down, if I have the chance, I go and I harvest that edible starch. That's just me. Get a little weird, but I like to learn these things. All right, so bread shouldn't be some sort of bland, spongy starch that you use to push down your food. When it's done right, it's as complex as wine. The pleasantly sour flavor of well-fermented dough, the nutty quality of freshly ground wheat flour, the butter caramel notes from the crust. Haven't you ever wondered, why does the Bible say that Yeshua is the bread of life? Bread was once worthy of that metaphor. Somehow, I don't think he'd want to be compared to Wonder Bread. I don't think so. So what about rice? Have you had your rice today? That's actually the greeting in China. So when I say, hello, Matt, how are you? They say, hey, Matt, have you had your rice today? No, because, no, well, yes, I had my daily bread. But the rice was a measure of well-being. And you're satisfied. Like even when I'm in Kenya, and if you want to say you're full, that's one thing. But their word for you're full means I am well satisfied. And it's a different meaning, you know? And so this is what they're talking about. Have you had your rice? Is your body, are you well satisfied within? You're nourished. So rice provides 20% or more of the world's calories, and more than 1/5 of the calories consumed by human worldwide is by rice alone. In Thailand, the call to come to the table is actually eat rice. That's how they tell them to come to the table. Traditional diets were always based on starch. We had rice in Asia, potatoes in South America, corn in Central America, wheat in Europe, and beans, millet, sweet potatoes, and barley throughout the world. I think it's funny when we look at the current diet trends to eat all the meat and then not hardly any grain. And then I go travel, and I go to India, and I go to Africa, and I go all over, and nobody can afford meat. Nobody can afford fat. You know, they're just eating the starch that they can get out of the ground. And I think, how is that historical? You know, but we did eat meat. There was hunting, and, you know, we were shepherds. We fed the land. I know we absolutely ate it. But I think that some things can get flip-flopped as we proceed through life. So let's take a look at the feasts of the Lord. We have 7 feasts, right? How many of them are based on food? Yeah, and what are they based on? Do we have a feast that's based on the time of the year when you would kill the sheep, or when you would butcher the goats? Yeah, yeah. But our feasts are what? Our harvests are on the wheat harvest, the barley harvest, and the wine harvest. And so I think that's so interesting, because when you look at all of the things that we eat, not saying the other things are wrong, but out of everything what we pick to eat, why did he pick those? Why did he pick wheat? Why did he pick barley? Why did he pick wine? And so as I study these through, I think that's so interesting. Well, wheat, it's supposed to be our sustenance. That's why Yeshua is the bread of life. It's what we live on. It's our sustenance. And barley is cool because barley is a softer type grain. So complete different application, like making muffins and pancakes or different kinds of things, maybe fermenting drinks. Or I like to just sprout the historic barley and just eat it as a raw cereal. You know, it's just some different applications. So you kind of get a well-rounded picture when you put those two grains together. And then when you look at the wine, my husband and I taught a class just this last year on how to actually make your own wine, naturally fermented wine. And what's interesting in our research, you know, a lot of people know about phytates and things like that, and we're like, man, try to find a phytate-free bottle of wine. It's kind of tough, but you try to look for it. But that's only one of like 20 to 30 different chemicals, and they're not required to disclose the ones that they've used. So there's all these chemicals, and they skip steps, and a lot of stuff is just kind of made in a lab today. It's not the same. And when you actually ferment the rice, you ferment your wine in the traditional way, guess what you get? You end up with a tincture. And so whatever you use, if you've used the fresh grapes or whatever you've made your wine from, the properties, the antioxidants and all the properties of that fruit it expands, it gets concentrated, and you end up with a tincture. So now the wine becomes medicine, right? And it preserves your vitamin C, it preserves all of your nutrients in there. So when they're traveling along and they've got their bread, their sustenance, they got their wine, their medicine, and all of their other vital nutrients in there, they've got the whole package. And then they can supplement with other wild edibles and other things from the garden along the way, but they've got the base covered. And I think that's awesome as we look at our Father's feasts. And we're seeing the restoration of all things. And so we have the original wheat back. That's called einkorn. We have the original barley back. That's called Black Nile barley. And later on, I'm going to tell you where to source these things, and we'll talk about the grains a little more. And the only thing left is for us to get back to making truly cultivated wine that's medicine and can be used as medicine. All right, so if we look at this doctor, Dr. John McDougall, he wrote a book called The Starch Solution, and he's getting all kinds of testimonies of people getting well and losing weight by eating starch. Now, that's a contradiction to our society, isn't it? But it's happening for him. And this guy, Andrew Taylor, he's from Melbourne, Australia. He began what was called a Spud Fit challenge in January. Spud Fit challenge. And he weighed 334 pounds. Yes. And he decided, you know what, I'm addicted to food. I'm obviously using food as a coping mechanism. So he said, I'm just going to eliminate it. What can I find the perfect food that will actually give me everything I need so I can live and be okay, and I can forget about food and just eat that. So he ate only potatoes for 1 year. Only potatoes, and he's now 220 pounds. At that point, you know, he said it was an extreme eating plan, but it ended up breaking his addiction and saving his life, and he actually has a whole ministry now called Spud Fit. So it's kind of interesting. And, you know, my husband and I have done that when we've been traveling, and, you know, we do a lot of ministry, and, you know, ministry work, we usually have no money, right? And we'd be on the road for weeks, and sometimes we'd say, you know what, let's just eat potatoes and sprouts. We'll just grow our sprouts and have potatoes. And we've done that in the past because it was really cheap. Buy a 50-pound box of potatoes and go. And it worked. But this is a picture of Ernest Moore. He's our director of our training center that we're opening up in Liberia to teach people how to grow their own food. They would grow all the other stuff, and then they would go to the store and buy their rice. Well, it was white rice from China. It had been refined. Well, then COVID happened, and there was no rice in the store. The supply chains had shut down, and they went to the store, and there was nothing. And he said, that's it. We're going to grow our own rice. So he grew an heirloom variety of brown rice, harvested it, and they began to eat their own rice. And a year later, he had a whole list of health testimonies of how his testimony had changed because he actually went back to the heirloom country grain that Abba had given us, and not that refined stuff that he was getting from the store. And it's deeper than refined, that we'll find out in a minute. But it was a huge testimony. And it actually stirred up a whole bunch of movements in the country of Liberia of people to be empowered to grow their own food. So has anybody read this book, The Wheat Belly? Yeah. So the Wheat Belly, he goes into talking about what happened to our grain. And how did it get changed from the way it was originally? That's the whole point of his book. He goes through it, and then he says, so one solution would be to go back to eating the original grain. That would be one solution. And then and then he mentioned that woman that reintroduced the grain, Ellie, the Jewish lady that I had spent time with. And then he said, in the very next sentence, he says, but that's too much work. Who's going to do that? Nobody's going to do that. So let's just not eat grain. And he threw it out the window. And from then on, the whole rest of the book is about how you shouldn't eat grain. But yet there was one sentence in there where he said that was a possible solution. Then we have this book, Grain Brain. Has anyone read that one? Yeah, so that's another one that talks about the negative effects of grain. And his premise in his book is that we have evolved to the point where we don't process grains well anymore. So it's not a good fuel for us anymore as humans. So how many people here think we were evolved? Yeah, so that solution doesn't work for me because I believe we are fearfully and wonderfully made, and that he laid out a diet for us and told us what to eat in Scripture. And so that just doesn't work. Yeah, I agree. He's probably telling the truth about the effects of grain, but he's talking about modern grain, and that's not what our Father made for us. it's been changed. So, and then and all the other things. So, and here's another statement. Bread is like the sun. It rises in the east and it sets in the west. Is that not also a true statement? Yeah, it is. Yeah, so what is going on? We know that what Abba made for us has to be good. So, what's the problem? That's what we want to get into. So, the main causes, number one, we have biotech altered grains today. And that's different than genetic modification. And I'm going to explain the difference between the two. But that's number one. Number two is the refinement process. We'll get into that into more detail, but within 24 hours, most of the goodies, what we want, is not valuable anymore in that flour. And then we're not preparing it according to traditional methods. So those are my three main causes for why we end up with problems when we eat grain today. So let's talk about biotech engineered food real quick. Anybody think Abba made an orange that looks like that? No. Or bananas used to have seeds like that on the top. Or can you find a watermelon in the store that still has the seeds in it? No, it's very, very hard. Over here, we see the difference in the heights and all the changes that they're making in our food today. So we want to focus on our story. It begins back in 1943. What was going on in 1943 in our world? Yeah, the whole world was at war, right? So what's going on behind the scenes? Because I guarantee people weren't paying attention to what was going on in Mexico, right? Everything with Germany and the United States and everything. So way down here in Mexico City, we had a partnership going on between the Mexican government and the Rockefeller Foundation. They decided, let's see if we can take the main crops of grain that are feeding the world and change them so that we can keep up with the growing population. Find a way to produce more food and more calories. So that was their goal. And it's called the International Maize and Wheat Improvement Center. How many believe we can improve on what God made? Yeah. So it's only going to produce problems, right? Yeah, and it's for maize and wheat. That's corn and wheat. But they also made changes in rice. And they actually, I forgot to point that out. I'll go back here. This Norman, he actually won a Nobel Peace Prize for this in 1970, that he was going to save the world, and there would not be any starvation and hunger anymore because of the way they changed our grains. So do you think that's been accomplished? Yeah, and you remember that. Yeah. And I'm sure he had good intentions. You know, they were probably very excited about what they were doing. Yeah. No, because we went against God's creation and his method of doing things. Yeah. So what they did is they exposed, because this was prior to genetic modification. So the process of genetic modification didn't exist yet. So they exposed seeds and embryos to the chemical sodium oxide, a toxic chemical. And human exposure resulted in immediate cardiac arrest and death. Immediate. Now, this is the chemical that they finally settled on, but they were trying everything. And the seed itself went through thousands of mutations. But look what the CDC says. CDC says, advise bystanders. So this is somebody who's witnessed someone who had got exposure to the chemical. Advise them to not offer CPR, as the helpless rescuer will die with the victim, and to not throw any vomit in the sink, as it may explode, and that indeed has actually happened in real life. So this is not a natural process that they've done. If you look at it, this is an example here of a daisy that has gone through mutations on purpose. And look at the change in the daisy from what it was. That wasn't what our Father created. And that's what they did to the wheat. Thousands and thousands of mutations. So they created something that never existed before. Okay, it's different than creating a different variety of a grain. They created something that never existed, was never designed to even be in our bodies. So in Leviticus 19, we see, guard my laws. Do not let your livestock mate with another kind. Do not sow your field with mixed seed. And do not put a garment woven of two sorts of thread upon you. So my interpretation of this verse, I believe he's basically saying, don't create something that I didn't create in nature. Don't create an animal that didn't exist. Don't create a fabric that didn't exist. Don't create something because I created everything and it's perfect. And you don't go and come and change it. And if you do, there's going to be consequences because it's totally against. So by this definition alone, modern wheat is against Torah. That's sad. That's really sad because they have completely changed it. So the characteristics of modern wheat. Now remember, this has been around now since 1940s. We're going on almost 100 years. So people just think that's normal. That's what the wheat is, right? But characteristics, it's short. We don't have amber waves of grains anymore. It maybe becomes knee-high. It's very short with heavy heads. It does provide a much higher yield, up to 10 times. It stands up real proud. Isn't that interesting? Think about the wheat and the tares. Yeah, one is to bend over and become humble at the end. Not this one. It never gets humble. It stands proud the whole time. It gets only 18 inches tall, so you can't thatch it like you normally would. What happened to thatched roofs? If you look at thatched roofs over in England, they lasted for hundreds of years. I mean, they were awesome. But nobody thatches anymore because we don't have the material, because we don't have the tall wheat like we used to have. It doesn't collapse. It has very shallow roots. There's a reduced number of leaves. So because it has a lot less leaves, it can't do that same process of photosynthesis, right? So the leaves are like the solar field. They get the energy for the plant. It doesn't have that. And so it's dependent entirely on the system. We must give it the fertilizer. It's totally dependent on that system of man. It has to have the fertilizer. It cannot survive in the wild. You take it out and just throw it. It won't keep replicating itself on its own. And any climate disruption, and we have famine. And that's actually what we're looking at today, because we have the shipping. Russia is the largest producer of fertilizer in the world, and the ships going out do not have insurance anymore, and those shipments are being shut down. And so we're about to experience this where the world doesn't have access to fertilizer, which our wheat is dependent upon, the modern day wheat. So, but how awesome for the enemy, because he set up something that keeps you dependent on the system of man. So the health repercussions of modern wheat, it has a reduced density by 18 to 29%. That's almost 1/3. That's a lot less nutrients, but yet its calories are much higher. And it has a lot more starch. If you look at the ancient wheat, the oldest form of wheat we have, it has 40% more protein and less starch. Isn't that interesting? So they created a wheat that was really high in starch, where the original wheat had a lot more protein in it. 40% more. That's a major difference. Major. So we're eating an empty harvest, and then we're craving more calories. They estimate a person eats up to 400 more calories per day because of it, just to get the basic nutrition that our body's looking for. So here we have some other effects of modern wheat. It raises your blood sugar. Okay? Look at this glycemic index in the middle. We have sugar at 59. What's modern wheat? It's higher than sugar. Isn't that crazy? And then what happens? People can't eat the modern wheat, so they go to gluten-free. Look at the gluten-free glycemic index. That's gluten-free products are not the right way to eat grain either. Okay, so there's another answer, which I'm going to get to today. But look at that, einkorn. Now that's not corn, that's the name of the most oldest form of wheat. Okay, very basic form of wheat, einkorn. It actually lowers your blood sugar. Isn't that amazing? Y'all had it figured out. And here we already said it's 400 more calories. It really causes food cravings. It's terrible. Leaves your body wanting. Creates addictions. It causes inflammation. Who knows that one? That's a huge problem today, inflammation. Causes weight gain, especially around the waist. Like we said, it rises in the yeast and settles in the waist. And a study done in 2009 revealed gluten intolerance to be 4 times more prevalent than in 1960. So a huge rise in that. And it's a different type of gluten. So this is the biggest thing I want you to, this is a takeaway, make sure you get this point. It's not that modern wheat has more gluten, it's that it's a different kind, okay? It's a kind, if you look at the molecular structure of it, it's a kind of gluten that never existed in history ever. God did not make that gluten. It's not what he made, okay? It's been totally changed. So 5% of the protein in modern wheat is not found in any of the parents that were used to breed it. A totally brand new created type, because gluten is a protein. So we have 14 new gluten proteins that were identified that were not present ever in any other wheat. And we have a higher quantity of genes for gluten proteins associated with celiac disease. So worldwide, we have a rise in celiac disease occurred at the same time as the development of this dwarf wheat. They totally correlate. So ancient grains are exceptionally high in phytonutrients and antioxidants, the things that really help our immune system. There's a genetic difference that's generated via 1,000 of human-engineered manipulations for substantial variations in composition, appearance, and qualities important not just to the chefs, but also to human health. So it completely changed. Even if you learn how to make ancient bread, it turns out different than modern wheat does. You know, like if you buy Wheat Montana Farms, Prairie Gold, or any of you ever buy that stuff? Yeah, that is modern wheat. And even if it's organic, it's still modern wheat. Okay, you have to actually go back to the ancient variety.
How do you do that?
So I'm going to give the resources on where to purchase them when we get towards the end. Yeah. And you can also grow it out and stuff too. But here's another cool, interesting thing. On these modern wheat, look at that. Never ever tested on animals or humans. Can you believe that? Yeah. Yeah, and the whole world is now eating it. Eating and suffering. So the most nutrient-dense ancient grain we have is einkorn. It's incredible. Einkorn has, basically, if you eat it as bread, it has everything you need, except it's lacking some A, some C, a little D, and one of the proteins called lysine. So vitamin A you get from greens, vitamin C you get from fruits, vitamin D you can get from the sun, and the protein lysine you can get from beans or meat. Okay? But if you actually take your berries and you grow wheatgrass, you can get the A and the C. And, you know, so you could actually have almost everything just from wheat alone. So if you look at storing up your food, a lot of people with this prepper movement, you want to get all this food stored up, you literally could just store einkorn, you know, and not worry about having all these meals prepped and all these things made, and just store the basics. Get your bread and maybe your wine tincture and be good to go. So einkorn has high levels of lutein and beta-carotenes. Who knows? Those are awesome antioxidants, right? They're great. They reduce the risk of macular degeneration and the leading cause of vision among Americans. So I am 54, but I still don't have glasses. I still don't need reading glasses either. And so I think a lot of this is attributed to getting good quality grains and greens in the diet. But in North America, the daily intake for lutein is far below the recommended levels, most likely due to the fact that we're not eating enough dark green leafy vegetables. And if I ever get a chance to come here and teach on greens and beans, we're going to be making t-shirts because greens and beans is really the key. There's just amazing nutrients in them, but that's a whole nother lecture. And then we have this issue of Roundup Ready modern wheat. So you might have somebody, and I'm one of those, I could eat pasta from Italy or flour from Italy, and it doesn't bother me, even though it's modern wheat. And I think that's because there's residue from Roundup found in our foods in America. And so some people are actually reacting to the Roundup residue in addition to the wheat. So that's another issue. So even if you get like the Prairie Gold that we talk about, at least you wouldn't have the Roundup residue in that wheat, and you wouldn't have that reaction. But Roundup, it wipes out and destroys beneficial gut species in our own gut. It increases the proliferation of the bad and harmful bacteria, and it promotes chronic gut inflammation. So this is another one that Bt toxin, if you go to organic stores and you look for pest control options, they sell Bt as an organic pesticide. And the problem with Bt, for me, it kills bugs off corn plants, but it also kills the bugs in our gut. So it kills both. And it's shown to drill holes inside the intestinal wall and create intestinal inflammation. It can also create other food intolerance, and there's a direct link between Bt toxin and celiac disease. So just be careful with that. We're talking about grains today. If you buy corn, even if you get non-GMO corn, even organic, they're probably using Bt toxin to grow the corn. Okay, so I'm trying to bring awareness today. It can be a very heavy, heavy topic, but I'm going to have some solutions for you as we get to the end. So the only solution I have for you is don't go to a restaurant. There's just really no way of getting around it. Restaurant is going to be junk food. I try to avoid it as much as I can. Even if I make my daily bread that I'm going to teach you how to make today, I'll at least take that into the restaurant if I have to, so at least I'm getting my einkorn along with whatever other poison I might get from the restaurant. All right, there's different types of corn. We're going to proceed because I don't want to go. This is a long lecture, so I'm going to have to skip some of the parts. But just keep in mind that flint, I believe, is the oldest type of corn, and sweet corn has only been around since the late 1700s. And so I'm not exactly sure on the way they propagated the sweet corn if that's something that would be in agreement with Torah. As I look at that one, I'm not exactly sure. I need to see because it could be a natural thing. But anyway, nixtamalization is also really important, and that is cooking your corn with lime. And people used to do it with ashes. They would take ashes and soak it in water, and then that lime chemical would be in the water, and then they cook the corn in that, which was not a problem when you're cooking over an open fire all the time, right? But that would actually change the composition in the corn, fix some of the nutrients in there, unlock other nutrients, and you can now be sustained by corn because it's one of the crops that provide a huge portion of the world, their sustenance. But you need to cook it. The people in Mexico believed you shouldn't even eat it if it wasn't cooked in lime. And pickling lime is the same thing. So you can just purchase pickling lime and use that. I do an 8-quart pot with 2 cups of dried corn and 2 tablespoons of pickling lime and water up to the top, and you cook it till it's tender. And it tastes amazing, and it feels so good. One more time. I do an 8-quart pot and 2 cups of dried corn, and I get the grain corn. Try to get the oldest form that you can. And then 2 tablespoons of pickling lime. It's like the powder. And then fill it up with water and cook it until it's tender. Which takes about an hour or so. And then from there, you want to rinse it really, really well because you want to get the lime out. But after it's rinsed really well, you can either run it through a corn grinder and have fresh dough to make tortillas, or you can dry it out and grind it into cornmeal. Okay? All right, so let's review real quick. The Green Revolution is what happened when we went to change our grain so that we could feed the world. Okay, we were going to do that. What dwarfed means that the plants are no longer the size they should be. They're these smaller, proud standing wheat. Biotech engineered was done by mutations, not by genetic modification. GMO is where, you know what GMO is, right? They take a gene from something else and insert it in, right? So biotech, the embryo is exposed to a harsh chemical to get it to mutate. They're trying to get it to mutate on its own. Genetic modification is where they take the embryo, but they take a gene from something else. It may not even be wheat. It might be a spider. It might be, something totally different. And they take that gene and they insert it into the embryo. So they're forcing it to change, which is what a lot of our food is today. And I saw an article not too long ago. It was by a reputable, I'm trying to think who it was. It was somebody that we would consider reputable. Can't remember who it was. But they were saying that tomatoes are now going to all be genetic modified and they don't have to disclose it on the packaging. But that's so obvious. You taste a tomato from the store, it doesn't taste at all like a tomato, but it's definitely this, and that's why I'm preaching to everybody, get back to being self-sustainable. Get back to growing your own food as much as you can. And we're going to need it for the millennial reign anyway, to be able to grow our own food. And then BT was that toxin that they use for organic farming. Okay, so the takeaway from this section is modern wheat's not the same as ancient wheat, okay? It's not apples to apples at all. So you can't put grains are bad. No, you have to drill down, okay? The process of creating modern wheat was worse than genetic modification, and modern wheat contains a different kind of gluten, okay? Those are the three main things I wanted you to take home from this section. So we are at the halfway point. How is everybody doing? Okay, am I throwing too much at you too quick? Okay, because I might go a little quicker in this next one. I want to finish by at least 20 after, because I want to show you how I make my daily bread.
May I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Isn't there cyanide naturally occurring in the dirt, and they say there's cyanide in rice?
Well, there's cyanide in lots of things. Like one of my main sustaining crops for me is cassava. But if I cook it for 10 minutes, the cyanide dissipates and it's gone. So rice doesn't have cyanide. I don't think so. Oh, I know what you're talking about, arsenic. Aren't you talking about arsenic? Yes. There's arsenic in our water tables. So there's wet rice and dry rice. So if you're eating rice that grew in wetlands, yes, there's arsenic in that rice. And so if you process that through fermentation, which I'll talk about a little later, but if you just look it up, it's IDLI. IDLI. That is a traditional way of making bread in India, where it's a two-step fermentation process. It's very easy to do, and that will deal with the arsenic. Okay? But I still try to keep everything in moderation, like don't have that be the only thing you're eating for a grain. Yeah, but that helps. All right, so then let's dig in real quick. We want to talk about the refinement now. What happens when we take it and we refine it. And yes, refining goes all the way back. The kings always ate the white flour. And it was a long process. That's why only kings ate it, because it took a lot of servants to be able to produce it. Yeah. Okay, but the food of the peasants is always the best. And that's what's going on over in Africa today. They want to eat like us because they want to be like us. They think it's a sign of prosperity if you get fat. And it's terrible. They have like margarine on big end caps and all this stuff. And you tell them, go back to your porridge, you guys. You're much better off there. Okay, so anyway, when you look at the composition of the grain, you have this outer bran. That's where the fiber and all the B vitamins are. B vitamins are so critical, right? Well, anything that you buy that's refined, that's completely gone. That is totally taken off. Then we have the endosperm in the middle. That's where the protein and the carbohydrates are. So einkorn would have like 40% more protein in there, where modern wheat is all starch in that middle. And then this germ is where vitamins B, E, and antioxidants reside. So you've heard of wheat germ, that endosperm right there in the middle, that, when it gets exposed to oxygen, goes rancid really fast. Rolled oats, for example. I have my own roller. I put the whole oats in there, turn the handle, and they're rolled. And they're fresh, and they're yummy. But once you roll them and you expose them to oxygen and air, it's only like 4 days, and that's rancid. And so now you've got a rancid vitamin E that's actually going to be more of a problem to the body than the benefit that it should have been, because it's now a rancid fat, okay? So that's in there, but that was all made for us. And there's lots of testimonies of people who went back to grinding their own flour, and they were struggling with warts and things that were identified as a vitamin E deficiency. And once they went back to milling their own flour fresh, those things disappeared. And so they were getting a nice, fresh, healthy dose of vitamin E. Okay, so the bran, we already talked about that. But yeah, they do bleach that to make it whiter, and a lot of flour has bromide with it too, which is not good. But 95% of all flour sold today is white, and all those goodies that are taken out, what do we do with them? They're given to chickens to fatten the chickens. So the animals are really getting what we should be eating. Okay? The goodies are given to the animals. in the processing. So most brown bread is just white bread with a fake tan, which is about the truth. Yeah, and this is a very interesting book, Real Food, Fake Food. It's amazing how much food in the store is actually fake. When you study it out, it's just, ugh. And that's been my life passion, so I don't even like to go to the store anymore. This is a loaf of bread found at Aldi. It says sprouted ancient grain. Okay, it says organic, non-GMO. Does that sound like something good that we should eat? Yeah, it does, right? Except I took a loaf of that and put it under the table on purpose and came back 3 months later. What do you think I found? Didn't look any different. And if you look on the labeling, there was no preservatives listed on that at all. So what did they do to it? They did something. I can't put my homemade bread under the table. There's no way. So anyway, I better get to the good news pretty soon. All right, so if you guys get a chance, anybody watch Michael Rood ever on Shabbat Night Live? Have you seen this series? Okay, that's a really good series. She deals with the refinement of grain. So she does not talk about biotech engineering. In fact, she says she's not even sure if it's true, but I sat there fact checking, and everything that I pulled up said it is. But that's her mission, and her ministry is the refinement. Okay, I'm giving you 3 different problems. She focuses on refinement. And she's getting amazing testimonies just by focusing on that one thing. Yeah, and so it's an amazing series if you want to watch that one. It says, the people curse. Oh, this is so cool. This is her testimony. It's so amazing, you guys. They had decided they were going to sell wheat, and they took some of their retirement, I believe, and they ordered semi-truck of wheat. Well, they ordered from one company that said it won't be ready for a year, so then they ordered from another one that said it won't be ready for a while, and then all of a sudden, they both called and said, we're ready, we're shipping now. So they had 2 semi-trucks of wheat, and so they had to invest in that, and she woke up the next morning to do her daily devotions, and she's like, what did we do? Did we make a mistake? And that day, in her Bible reading, was this verse. And it says, the people curse him who withholds grain, but a blessing is on him who sells it. Isn't that awesome? That's so cool. It's such confirmation for what they were about to do to sell grain. So I'll tell you what our Shabbat group does. We order a pallet of grain every October, and we order it from a place called Country Life Natural Foods. Country Life Natural Foods, and that's abbreviated CLNF.org. And if you order at least a half a pallet, you get 30% off. So you're buying in bulk because you're getting 50-pound sacks to start with. You're buying in bulk, then you get 30% off, and then you get free shipping. So we all pool together, and we order by the pallet. And then we all divide it up amongst ourselves because Scripture says there's a blessing on us if we get that grain, right? Yes. So we need to find a way to mill your own flour because of the refinement process and what happens. Now, yeah. Yeah, and that's what Joseph did. Joseph's a type of Messiah too, right? Yeah, so it's really cool. So, yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, you remember how Scripture says don't take the upper and the lower millstone? Right? And we usually, a lot of times we think, oh, that was because he needed it for his livelihood because that was that person's profession. And I've really thought about that, and I thought, well, in any village, there's probably one miller. Was he really speaking about that small percentage? And the more I thought about it, I'm like, I think he was referring to all of us, because when you grind it, you should consume it as soon as possible, process it right away. And so if we had millstones in our home like we used to have, we would be grinding it fresh, and we'd be getting that freshly milled grain all the time. So the enemy's done a really crafty job, because all over the world, people don't have millstones in their house, very few. Anybody here own a flour grinder? Good. 1, 2, 3. Awesome, you guys. That's great. That's awesome. But do you use it? Yeah. But yeah, it's awesome. We got to get back to having it. And there it is. Don't take the upper or the lower millstone. You'd be taking a life. Look at that. You'd be taking a life in pledge. Yeah, that tells you that that person's life is dependent upon those millstones, because wheat is their sustenance, right? And they need it for life, so don't take it from them. Yeah. I don't know. Okay. All right, so here's just a couple. This is the one that Sue Becker likes. It's electric. This one's becoming hard to find, but if you already own a Champion juicer, they make an attachment, so that's economical. This is the one that's coming around as most popular today, the Country Life Grain Mill. Oh, did I go too far? Yeah. This is a hand crank one. This one, you can actually get two different augers, one for grain and one for corn, and then you can just swap out the auger. This one is one I'm going to get soon so I can bring it to Sukkot, because I want to have one with me at Sukkot. Got to do the daily grind. And this is the one that I own, and I bought a motor for it, so I actually there's a little groove inside there, and I put a belt in there, and then I put a motor on it and built it into a table and attached it to a switch. So I really like mine. And then you also can use the Vitamix. A lot of blenders will work. And this is my cereal roller, where I put the oats in there and I turn the handle and they come out rolled, which is really nice. And this is a picture I had in my lecture that I taught on grains over 20 years ago, 20-some years ago, and I wasn't Torah observant then, and there's just something about that picture. I just thought back to our culture and what it must have been like when they would go to have their bread baked. And, you could see the hearth oven there where they were baking the bread, but I didn't know what these were. Until recently, I started thinking, part of this problem with the flour grinders are so expensive. Like, if we need one, it should be part of everybody's home. Why is it expensive? Because, if Abba requires us to have it, we should have one. So I actually got granite from the dumpster of a granite countertop place, and I made a flour grinder. I made the lower millstones, the upper millstones. I made the whole thing because I'm like, there's got to be a solution that doesn't cost money for this. And I did it. And it was an awesome experience, but it's not very efficient. It takes me 15 minutes to get a half a cup of flour. So I'm like, I kind of thought, I didn't really consider it a success because it wasn't very efficient. But I did do it, and it gave me an understanding of how flour grinders work. And then I looked at this picture and I went, oh my gosh, those are flour grinders. So they would put a pole in there, a beam. And then remember Samson? He had to grind. Yeah, he would have had a pole coming like that, and he would walk around that thing instead of an animal being given that burden. He was doing it. And so he would walk around there with that beam, and then the flour would this is the upper millstone, and this is the lower millstone, and the flour would come out there, and it would collect in this channel. And you can even see over here, there's places that are left like a funnel where that flour can sift out and come out. And I thought, that's just amazing. I never seen that before. That's cool. And I don't know how. That'd be so much work to make that. Okay, so preparing grains properly, basically, all throughout history, indigenous cultures would always soak or ferment their grains. And I need to kind of pick this up so I can give you some concrete things to take away today. I'm going to skip these examples, but this is just culture after culture and the types of breads that they made. I am creating an online course right now for ancient grains consumption. It's got 8 chapters and 37 lessons. So I just kind of wanted to give you the main things that you needed today. But in the future, if you want, you can sign up for that class. And we go through how to actually make all of those. They used to compost the grain. That was really cool. And actually, I got to tell you that because I think this might have been related to our people. But they would take the grain, they would cut it, and they would stack it in what they called patties. So they would put the grain, then they'd water it, then the grain, then they'd water it, and they'd build these towers, and then they would leave it for a week as worship unto their God. And then at the end of the week, they would tear it down and let it dry out, and then they would harvest and process it. And during that time, it would heat up, like a compost pile heats up, and it would fix the water-soluble vitamins and the minerals in the starch. It would improve the protein content, the gelatinous of it. It inactivated certain enzymes that may have caused rancidity, killed off mold spores and insect larvae, lessened the cooking time, and increased the storage life. So could that have been Sukkot or something? No, Sukkot's the wine festival, isn't it? So maybe it wasn't our people. But I was originally thinking that maybe it was. But anyway, it just goes to show that what we do today is so different from where we were at. Now, the rest of this lecture is primarily focused on soaking and processing the grain. So I'm going to kind of move to what I think is easiest for you to know. One thing I want you to take away from this is you can cook cereal grains in a thermos. So a thermos doesn't need to just keep it warm. You can cook in it. So if you take your porridge and you just bring it to a boil until it starts to, the word is called stand, like you could stand a spoon in it, it kind of thickens, and you have your thermos preheated, once your oatmeal comes to a boil, dump the hot water out of your thermos, put your boiling cereal in there and put the cap on it, and it will slow cook all night long. And in the morning, it's so easy to digest and eat. So Mrs. Kellogg believed you shouldn't eat grains unless they slow cooked for 5 to 6 hours. And she did it over a double broiler. But she probably had her stove going all the time. You know, her wood stove. But this is another way to do it. Or a crock pot. But the thermos is just nice because then you can take it with you. And sometimes before we go to bed, I'll put it in there and I'll just put the thermos on the table. And it's just so handy. And in the morning, it's warm, it's ready, it's perfectly cooked. It doesn't stick. There's no sticky mess to clean up. It's just really nice way to cook porridge. So porridge is definitely one way. You can soak the grains and then cook them slowly would be an appropriate way. The gruaul that we talked about later, where you take your porridge and blend them into drinks, that's a definite way that you can consume grains. This is one I was telling you about, the idli. Idli batter is also made into dosa. That's fermented rice and beans, which is great because you're combining the two. And injera, that's the traditional bread of Ethiopia. Yep, and buckwheat is delicious. And buckwheat does not have gluten in it. And there's some great recipes for making buckwheat. I actually cook it in my crock pot and make beautiful slices. So if you want to know how to make buckwheat, I've got that recipe in my phone. Just get with me later on that one. It's really good. This is one of my favorite books if you want to learn how to cook with einkorn, because it does not react the same as modern wheat. It's a different process. It actually doesn't like to be kneaded. So that's good news because you don't have to do the kneading. Yeah, it's like so simple to make it once you understand it. Yeah, it's really simple. And then, of course, trying to expand your variety over time is great. And as far as growing ancient grains, so far I've tried sorghum and wheat and buckwheat, and it's so easy. The only issue is harvesting it. And when we're in Liberia, they take, a pestle and mortar. Well, they have some that are like this big, and they have them on the ground, and then they have big pestle sticks, and 2 or 3 people come and do that. And then they have a basket that they flip to get the chaff out. And so that's something, I'm lucky. I'm going there in November, so I'm just going to bring one home in my suitcase. But, you could easily make one that big by just hollowing out a log. Start a fire and then hollow it out, and fire and hollow it out, and get one done. But it's just probably a modern method, but I don't go for modern stuff very much. But I'm sure there can if you want to. And einkorn, by the way, that's another resource I want you guys to have. This is Azure Standard. Anybody familiar with Azure? Yes. AZURE Standard. That's another buyers club that our Shabbat group orders from. And Azure has einkorn berries to use for grinding into flour, but they also have einkorn berries that still have the husk on if you want to grow it yourself. And it's not hard to grow. Wheat grows in almost every region. It's just a matter of the processing it after it's done growing. And that's something that can be solved. But you also can get einkorn pasta from Amazon. I hate to even say that word, but that's some place you can get it. Whole Foods has it. I think there's some other places. Azure has it, Azure Standard. And so that's a pasta solution for einkorn. And then cereal grains. Got 7 minutes, but I got to teach you this about cereal really quick. Okay, 2 studies that were done on cereal. You ready for this one, you guys? This one was done on puffed wheat. So 4 sets of rats were given special diets. One group received plain whole wheat, water, vitamins, and minerals. Another group received puffed wheat, water, and the same nutrient solution. A third set was given water and white sugar, and a fourth giving nothing but water and the chemical nutrients. The rats, which received the whole wheat, lived over a year on the diet. The rats who got nothing but water and vitamins lived for about 8 weeks, and the animals on a white sugar and water diet lived for a month. But the company's own laboratory study showed that rats given vitamins, water, and all the puffed wheat they wanted died in 2 weeks. It wasn't a matter of the rats dying of malnutrition. Results like these suggest that there was something actually toxic about the puffed wheat itself. Proteins are very similar to certain toxins and molecular structure, and the puffing process of putting the grain under 1,500 pounds of pressure per square inch and then releasing it may produce chemical changes which turn a nutritious grain into a poisonous substance. We can't make it in our kitchen, you guys, right? I was shocked, so I showed the report to Dr. Clark and shared my concern. His predecessor, Dr. Graham, has published a report and begged the company not to continue producing puffed wheat because of its poisonous effects on animals. Dr. Clark went right to the president, and the president said, "I know people should throw it on brides and grooms at weddings," the president cracked, "but if they insist on sticking in their mouths, can I help it? Besides, we made $9 million on the stuff last year alone." And that comes from Paul's on fighting the food giants. And then one more, and then I'm going to close with my idea for your daily bread. This one's on cornflakes. In 1960, researchers at Ann Arbor University performed an interesting experiment on laboratory rats. 18 rats were divided into 3 groups. One group received cornflakes and water. A second group was given the cardboard box that the cornflakes came in and water. And the control group received a rat chow and water. The rats in the control group remained in good health throughout the experiment. The rats receiving the box became lethargic and eventually died of malnutrition. But the rats receiving cornflakes and water died before the rats who were given the box. The last cornflake rat died on the day the first box rat died. Before death, the cornflake rats developed schizophrenic behavior, threw fits, bit each other, and finally went into convulsions. Autopsies revealed dysfunction of the pancreas, liver, and kidneys, and degeneration of the nerves and the spine, all signs of insulin shock. The startling conclusion of this study is that there is more nourishment in the box that cold breakfast cereals come in than in the cereals themselves. Lorraine Zanier, designer of the experiment, actually proposed the protocol as a joke, but the results were far from funny, and they were never published, and similar studies have not been repeated. If consumers knew the truth about breakfast cereals, vast fortunes would be jeopardized. So I encourage you to learn to like oatmeal again. You know, it's when we do oatmeal, I take like dried figs and cover it with water and then blend it into like a thick sauce to put on there. Any dried fruit. I'll take frozen strawberries and put them over dried pineapple. And as they thaw, the dried pineapple absorbs the liquid from the strawberries, and then you blend it into a jam, a fresh jam that's delicious. You know, and there's other bananas and nuts and seeds, and you can build like banana splits out of your oatmeal. I mean, there's just so many fun ways that you can eat it, or even drink it like the grahul, or make the daily bread. So let me show you what my daily bread is. For some, the task of baking bread can be overwhelming. And for some, it's just plain not possible. And I'm on the road all the time. And when I'm gone, my husband would tend to go to the store and buy Wonder Bread. And it broke my heart. I'm like, you can't do that. And I'm too busy to have it made and frozen. So we got to thinking, what can be done? And I got to tell you, this solution is the bomb. It works amazing. So this recipe we're now calling our daily bread. And all we do is take the sourdough starter, and this is full of sourdough starter. Can we pass it from table to table? I want everybody to see what it looks like because it's perfectly fermented right now. It just looks great. And no, I made extras for all of you guys. But that's just sourdough starter by itself that I have multiplied and expanded. And the method I'm going to show you today does not require a flour grinder, so it works. I'm going to actually teach my 18-year-old how to do this in college so he can have his daily bread in his dorm room. It's that portable. It's that easy. So, yeah. And before we can make this daily bread, I brought some Dixie cups for everybody who's here today. If you would like some sourdough starter, you can go ahead and scoop some up to take home. You only need 1 tablespoon. Okay, you don't need a lot. And I forgot to tell you that I used to struggle every year with throwing away my sourdough starter when Passover came. I mean, I had this 30-year-old sourdough starter, and yet all the memories and everything, I just had a hard time with it. And this first couple years as I walked in Torah, I gave it to my mother-in-law who wasn't in covenant. And then later I started thinking, am I giving her my sin? You know? But I wrestled with it until one year. So everybody who wants sourdough starter should come and scoop it out so that I can make our daily bread with the rest. And you can all hear me if we don't talk. So just come and do it quietly. You need 1 tablespoon. Anyway, so finally one year I said, that's it. I'm getting all the sin out of my house. I'm doing it. And I pitched the sourdough starter, got rid of it, and then when Passover season was done and I went to start the next batch, I couldn't believe the time that I had with the Father. Every time I went to feed the sourdough starter, it's like he talked to me about new beginnings and a fresh start and coming anew with me. And it's like I had the most precious time with him. And it was just an amazing, beautiful cycle. And what I found was once I waited for unleavened bread to finish and I started the new sourdough starter, by the time it was strong enough, because it'll make pancakes and biscuits in like 2 weeks. But if you want a nice, beautiful raised loaf, it can take more like, up to 2 months, 6 to 8 weeks, right? So by the time it was at the point to raise a beautiful loaf of bread or challah bread, guess what it was? It was time for Shavuot. So I had my beautiful loaves to go and wave before the Lord, and it was just such a beautiful time with him. And so I encourage everybody when that time comes, do away with the old and get ready to bring in the new. And that next one I think had a better flavor than even the one from before. So, all right, so they're scooping up their starter. So this is what I do. I'm going to need to scoop some. Oh, I didn't bring. Oh, do we have a little bowl?
Yes.
Okay. You just need a tablespoon.
Like this? Or
Is there one that's a little bigger?
there's a larger paper bowl over there. Is that what you want?
Yeah, like a Tupperware bowl, something that's a little bigger. Okay, so this is my grains that I bring with me. These are called Sammy sacks. I recently found out I'm Sammy.
Hi, Sammy.
Yeah, hi. Sammy is the only indigenous tribe of Europe. And so these are kind of cool, but that's kind of a side note. But I've really enjoyed finding my actual tribe. And Sammy is short for Samuel, which means God is chosen. Isn't that cool? It's really neat. But, that'll work. That'll work great. Thank you. Okay. So when I'm at home or traveling or we're in our college dorm room, wherever we are, this is the process to make your daily bread, okay? You just take some of your sourdough and set it aside because you don't want to use it all up. If you use it all up, you have what? No more sourdough starter, right? So you have to set some aside for later. So I've set some of that aside. And now this that I set aside, my sourdough starter, I need to feed it because the organisms need to eat and they might like to eat starch. So I'll feed it and I put whole grain in there. So this one is oats, so I can put some whole grains in there. And I've been experimenting with all different kinds of grains. It does not seem to matter. I've got some einkorn. I'm using oats to stretch my einkorn because einkorn's expensive. You put your oats in there and then you just add water. And I add equal portions. So if I add 1/3 cup of whole grain, then I add 1/3 cup of water. And it's not exact anyway. Then I take this, if I'm traveling, I take this, which is a Vitamix, so it has a stronger motor. This is $150 for this one, because it's a stronger blender stick, but it works well when I'm traveling. And then I just plug it in, and I just blend this up until I have a batter, and I don't need a flour grinder, and I can do this in my hotel room. Okay, and now I've got my fresh grain flour, and then I'm just going to leave this until it gets nice and bubbly and ready to use. When it gets nice and bubbly and ready to use, like this one is, I can go ahead and I can just cook it on a waffle iron anywhere I am and use those waffle pieces as sandwich bread. I can use them for anything, okay? So that becomes that. Now let's say this is all nice and ready, but I don't have time to make waffles, okay? You have two options. You could put this in the fridge and deal with it a couple days from now, or I can just put the grain and feed it again. Give it some grain and some water and blend it, and then let it go again until it gets ripe. The next time it gets ripe, I can make waffles, I can put it in the fridge, or I can feed it again. And you just continue this cycle all the time, and so that you always have your daily bread. And you always have it with you no matter where you are. You don't have to heat the house up running the oven. You don't have to learn how to make bread. It's just so, so simple. And you can take this, and I have a friend that just likes it just the way it is. And she just puts it right on the waffle iron just the way it is. But if you don't like the sour taste, you add baking soda. Baking soda will neutralize that. Or you can add a little sweetener. Or let's say you want it to taste like regular bread. Well, what do you put in bread? Salt, sweetener, and a little fat, right? So put that in there. And then I always add a little baking soda because that does seem to neutralize it because it's 100% sourdough. So it will have a little sour flavor. And then you put it in there. But now you make variations, right? You want cinnamon raisin bread? Put some raisins in there and some cinnamon and put it on there. You know? You want to saute some onion and add some rye and some caraway seed? Put it in there. Put it on there. But you can do your daily bread. You don't need a flour grinder. You don't have to be home. It's so simple. Does it make sense? Do you guys understand how to do it? It's pretty easy. Okay, so another thing I do is in my house, my husband thinks it's a little sour, a little strong by itself. So I put together the ingredients that he likes to make it taste better. So I have ground flax seeds in here. I did a little bit of a raw, minimally processed sugar. I've got salt and baking powder. So if he's home alone and I'm off in Africa and he's got to make himself his daily bread, all he has to do is he's got his sourdough starter that he's fed. And you know how he does it? I got to tell you, he doesn't use this. He takes the base of the blender and he blends it in that and he just leaves it sit on the base until he's ready to feed it again or make waffles. And it's like so simple. Just stays right on the base. Anyway, so then he just takes this, and you just need about a spoonful. So I got a little bit more for you guys today, so I'm going to do about 2 spoonfuls. Throws that maybe a little more. It's a big batch. He puts that in there. Add a little bit of fat. I've got some coconut oil. He just puts that in there. Oh, it started to get hard. And then stir it up and fry it on your waffle iron, which we got to plug in to do. And that's how simple it is for him to make his daily bread. And now you're getting fresh ground einkorn, all the benefits of it that you need. It's been sitting, it's got broken down, making it more digestible because the sourdough starter has the organisms in there to break it down. And when you're ready to eat it, it's perfectly ready to sustain you and be the bread that you need. This one? Yeah, this one. Yeah, if we can plug it in, that'd be great. And then you guys can have some daily bread. I didn't get time because I just arrived very late last night. But Matt, I can make a handout with this recipe, the grayoule recipe, the variations that I would do for this bread. I can create that into a 1-page handout. And then if you want to go ahead and make sure it gets distributed to everybody, we can do that. And if you want, on the bottom of the handout, I can list the places that I recommended that you go to buy your grain. I can put all of that on one handout, and then I'll put my phone number on there as well in case you run into questions. Okay? All right? So, any questions? Because I'm pretty much out of time here. I've got 2 minutes left. Any questions? Yes.
Just out of curiosity, how about wild rice? I know it's actually a grass that they get out of in Minnesota, primarily Wisconsin area.
Yeah, I think wild rice is a great grain. Yeah, and again, I would soak it, and then cook it. And then it's great if you can cook them nice, low and slow is great. But yeah, I love wild rice. I think it's very good for you, definitely. And keep in mind when it comes to modern, the biotech engineered grains, it's primarily the grains on the mass market. So like this is a rice that I like, and we can pass this one around. But this is a red bran rice. You can find it in some stores, but I don't doubt that this has been tampered with because it's more money, it's less available. Everything on the mass market, you might as well figure has been biotech engineered. We can pass that around if people want to look at that rice. Yes?
So for starters, we have to eat it daily. We don't have the einkorn and the oats. What do we
Yeah.
do in the meantime?
Okay, great question. So she said, if I don't have einkorn at home or oats or a good grain that I trust, what can I do to keep my sourdough starter alive? And that would be, you could just go ahead and buy there's some flowers in the store, Robin Hood. Is it Robin Hood, I think? Or Bob's Red Mill. Yeah, Bob's Red Mill. You could just buy some flowers from them and feed it for now until you get what you need. And I want to show you, if I progress in this lecture, I can show you the stages of sourdough. And this was a great thing, too. This shows the difference between the health benefits of the yeast that's in sourdough versus the yeast that comes in an active dry package. It's definitely better for you. Yeah?
Quick question, because I saw you pass it really quick. The Ezekiel bread,
Yeah.
is that something good or not?
The Ezekiel bread has concentrated gluten put in it to hold it together. So yeah, it's actually higher in gluten and it's the modern gluten. It's vital wheat gluten extracted and put in there. So these are the stages of sourdough. Real quick, and you feed it. That's when you give it the starch and the water. You feed it, and then it becomes ripe. When I passed it around the room, that's what it looks like when it's ripe. Bubbly, it's light, it's fluffy, right? Then it becomes overripe. When it becomes overripe, it looks flat and sticky. It just looks flat and sticky, not very good. And then when you get to this revive stage, I'll show you what that looks like, because I think I have it in the next slide. So that's the good one. That's when it's ripe and ready to use. See how bubbly and nice it looks? This is when it becomes overripe. And this, if you put your sourdough starter in the fridge for 6 months, it's going to look like this. And I can't tell you how many people call me, I ruined my sourdough starter. I killed it. You can't kill it. If it looks like this, the Alaskans would drink that top part. They call it hooch. It's an alcohol. They would drink it. But all you do is just pour that top liquid off and then kind of pull the sides away and take your spoon and go down into the middle. Go down right into this middle part here and scoop out 1 tablespoon. Put that in a new vessel and then feed it. And depending upon how bad you've been, if it's been an entire year that you've left that in that refrigerator, you might have to feed it 2 or 3 times. But it'll come back. It'll totally come back. The organisms go almost dormant in the fridge. And they'll definitely be revived and ready to go again. Okay? Any other questions? I think I'm out of time. Yeah? Yeah. Yeah, very good point. But it's a solution for people when they don't have anything else. Because there would also be phytic acid in there as well. So, yeah, so I don't want to give you guys all this bad information, and then you go home and you have nothing to do. At least the gluten is at least the other aspects of the grain are intact, Yeah, so ideally, you would fresh grind your einkorn and you would make homemade pasta. But I don't know that everybody's ready to do that. So I was just trying to give some solutions that would work for everyone. But yes, you're absolutely right. In that factor, it wouldn't retain the vitamin E. Yeah. Okay. I think I would quit. It's after 1:30. I'll plug this in somewhere in Fry Waffles.
Did you guys enjoy that? Did you get a lot out of it?
Yeah.
Thank you so much. So before we break from here, we were talking about coming back tomorrow at noon to do a session on gut health, which is, I would assume, is kind of an extension of this.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
Can I just get a show of hands of who would be interested in coming to that? Okay. All right. Very cool. Okay, so tomorrow at noon here. And so from here, what I want to do, we're going to break. We have to do sound check for worship, so everybody just go for a walk. No, but we'll come back and we'll be ready at 2 for service. So appreciate you guys. And this smells
You're
awesome.
welcome. Yeah, you can still hear me. When I make these, I found if I use less batter, it works better for bread because it's not as fat like a waffle is. I make them thinner. It works a little better.